The night was velvet black, the kind of darkness that swallows the edges of everything, until even memories start to feel uncertain somewhere far away. A generator hummed, but here in this hidden corner of the world, there was only the slow creak of an old door giving way. A sliver of silver caught the faint light, a curve too perfect to be anything but an Aston Martin. The same machine that once danced through gunfire and explosions on a James Bond set back in the days of reel-to-reel glamour. 50 years had passed since anyone had seen it. The rumours had grown wilder with each retelling. Some said it was stripped for parts. Others swore it sat in a vault beneath the desert, and yet here it was, its skin dulled by time, its secrets intact, and the truth about where it had been all those years was about to turn a film legend into a real-life mystery no spy movie could match.
It began with the quiet hum of a forgotten hangar, far from the eyes of the world, the kind of place where echoes settle in corners and dust lies undisturbed for years. The Aston Martin rested there, its silver skin dulled by time, but its lines still sharp enough to cut memory itself. No one looking at it could miss the fact that this was the same machine that once purred down alpine roads under the hands of James Bond himself. And yet here in the dim light it looked less like a star and more like a ghost. There were no crowds, no camera crews, only the muffled scuff of a lone pair of boots crossing the concrete. The man who had come to see it kept his head low, as if afraid even the walls might be listening. He moved slowly, tracing the contour of the fender with his eyes before touching it, his hand meeting a chill that belonged to things left alone too long. He glanced toward the door, then back to the chassis plate, and that was the moment a truth began to take shape, a truth so heavy it bent the air around it for 50 years. This car had not been lost. It had been hidden, and whoever had kept it that way had done so with purpose. He tried to imagine the night it vanished from that Florida hangar. The locks snapped clean, the guards reporting nothing out of place, the sheer precision of it all. No cameras, no alarms, no chatter in the underworld to give away the buyer. Whoever took it had disappeared into the folds of the globe like a coin dropped into dark water. Months became years, and the few leads that surfaced felt staged, as if thrown to keep the story alive without giving it away. Grainy photos on foreign roads, whispers in ports, but always just out of reach. And now here it was, within arm's length, as real as the oil smell rising faintly from its hood, still wearing the scars of a life lived off record. Outside, a plane engine coughed to life, the vibration running along the hangar floor. The man stepped back, eyes still locked on the car, then took a single photo before sliding the camera deep into his jacket. The click of the hangar door closing seemed to carry a promise and a warning, both because finding it was only the beginning, and the reason it had stayed hidden for half a century was the part of the story that could still get someone killed. The Florida heat lingered in the night air that clung to the skin and made each breath feel heavier than the last out on the tarmac. The quiet was so complete you could hear the hum of the sodium lights from 100 yards away in the hangar. The DB5 waited gleaming under the faint wash of a security lamp, its silver flanks like the surface of still water, only broken by the thin lines of its panels. It should have been safe. The locks were industrial, the guards routine, the location discreet, and yet sometime between the tick of one clock and the next, it vanished without a sound. The investigation began before the sun was fully up. Men in plain suits, moving like shadows across the concrete, their shoes tapping out a rhythm of urgency. The hangar doors were intact, save for a lock that had been cut so clean the edges still felt warm. The inside was untouched. No scattered tools, no tire marks leading away outside. The asphalt stretched into nothing, the only trace of faint chemical smell that no one could place. Interviews started with the night staff, 2 guards who swore nothing unusual had happened. Their rounds unbroken, their eyes on every gate. The airport logs showed no unscheduled flights, no late-night cargo movements, and yet a car had left here somehow, without an engine starting, without a trailer being seen. The first theory was inside help, the second, a staged theft, the third so far-fetched, no one would put it on record that it had been lifted out altogether. Weeks passed, the DB5's absence spreading through the car world like a shadow over water. There were whispered sightings, a flash of silver on a rural road in Spain, a photograph too blurred to prove anything from a warehouse in Kuwait, an unconfirmed customs report in South America. Each lead fizzled out as if someone were scrubbing the trail just enough to leave the scent, but never the source. The insurance payout was quiet, almost secretive. The figure never officially released. The owner vanished into seclusion, refusing interviews, refusing even to confirm the theft to some. It was an admission that the car had been sold under the table to others. It was proof he'd been threatened into silence in collector circles. The story took on a life of its own, a ghost car that could be anywhere in the world or nowhere at all. And then one late evening, decades later, a call landed on the desk of a man who'd been chasing the DB5 since the 80s. A voice on the other end said, "I think I found your car, but if you want to see it, you come alone and you do not tell anyone where you're going." The air on the other side of that call felt heavier somehow, as if distance itself was thick with all the years this car had been missing. The man who had chased rumors for decades knew better than to trust easily, but there was something in the voice on the line, a careful choice of words as though each one had been weighed before leaving the mouth. It took 3 days of silence before he agreed to meet. The instructions were precise and almost paranoid, a commercial flight to a city where he'd never worked before, a rental car paid in cash. No phone calls, no messages at the airport. A second envelope waited for him under a false name inside a map with no labels and a small brass key. He drove for hours through empty stretches where the horizon rippled in the heat until the road narrowed to cracked tarmac barely wider than his tires. A rusted gate leaned against one hinge, and beyond it, an old warehouse crouched low against the wind. The padlock on the door was fresh, too fresh for a place that looked abandoned for years. He turned the key, heard the click, and stepped into dimness that smelled of engine oil and sea air. The light inside came from one window high above, slicing through the dust in pale shafts that landed on a long shape draped in canvas. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though the building didn't quite believe someone was there again. The closer he got, the clearer the outline became, not just a car, but the car lines like a signature. The dip of the roof, the set of the wheel arches. His hand found the fabric and paused. Hearing the faint sound of a latch turning somewhere behind him, he pulled the cover back anyway. Silver shimmered under the layer of grime, the gadgets in the grille unmistakable. His heart pounded, but the sound behind him was closer now. He turned, but the door was already swinging shut. The figure outside, just a shadow in the blinding light before the lock slid home again. The voice from the phone spoke from beyond the metal, calm and almost amused. "You've seen it now, but that's all you get."
The echo of retreating footsteps left him alone with the DB5, the dust still hanging in the air, the truth almost within reach, yet impossibly far away again. The silence inside that warehouse was not the kind of quiet that settles when a place is empty. It was the kind that feels occupied by things you cannot see. The man stood there with the DB5 just a few steps away, but the lock on the outside door meant there was no way out. Not yet. He could hear faint movement in the shadows above the groan of old beams, shifting as if the building itself was uneasy. His eyes went back to the car, and the details told their own story. The dust on the bonnet was thick but broken in 2 clean arcs where hands had wiped it. Recently the tires, though aged, were inflated. The driver's window was rolled down an inch as if someone had been inside not long ago. The leather interior still held that sharp smell that comes only from recent use, not from decades of abandonment.
Then he noticed something small under the driver's seat, a slip of folded paper, yellowed and brittle. He crouched slowly, glancing toward the sound above. As it grew fainter and slipped the paper free, inside was a number written in heavy black ink, along with a word in a language he didn't recognize. The handwriting was rushed, almost violent, as though the writer didn't have time to be neat. A soft click echoed from behind the far wall, like a door unlatching. A narrow draft of warm air carried a different scent into the room, salt and fuel mixed together. He followed it to a seam in the wall no wider than his finger, and realized it wasn't a wall at all, but the side of a massive sliding panel. Someone had built a false wall inside the warehouse. Footsteps returned, this time heavier and unhurried. The light spilling through the window dimmed as a shadow passed across it. He slipped the paper into his jacket instinctively and moved back toward the car, keeping one hand on its cold fender. When the door lock rattled again, he stepped away as though he had been caught trespassing, and the figure from outside reappeared, silhouette framed in glare. The voice, calm, but with an edge, said, "Some stories aren't meant to be told, and if you know what's good for you, you'll walk away now." But he knew walking away had never been his way, and whatever was behind that false wall might be the key to the 50-year shadow that had swallowed the most famous car in movie history. The draught of warm air spilling from that narrow seam carried with it the tang of salt and something sharper, almost like aviation fuel. It was faint but insistent enough to pull him closer, his fingertips tracing the invisible line of the hidden panel as the echo of those heavy retreating footsteps faded somewhere beyond the warehouse. The DB5 loomed behind him, silent witness to whatever secret was locked on the other side. The false wall had been built with care. The panels matched the surrounding metal perfectly, the bolts painted to vanish in the shadows. He pressed his ear against it and thought he could hear the hollow murmur of an even larger space beyond the scrape of a chain being dragged across a floor. Then silence. In the gloom, every second stretched out thin, the kind of time that feels stolen. He knew he might have minutes before the figure returned, so he scanned the walls for a release mechanism. One hinge was newer than the rest, barely touched by rust, and as he pushed at it, the metal flexed just enough to show a sliver of deeper darkness. He slid through sideways into a space that smelled older than the hangar itself. A cavernous room lit only by streaks of moonlight spilling through broken vents, shapes draped in canvas lined both sides, and as his eyes adjusted, he realized these were not wrecks or scrap, but cars, each one with a presence like the DB5 high-value machines, whose very existence in this place defied logic. At the far end, a wooden crate the size of a small garage sat on a metal dolly-thick rope still lashed around it as if it had been delivered recently. In one corner, an oil drum with a shipping label printed in Arabic beside it lay a canvas duffel half open, its contents obscured except for the unmistakable glint of a license plate embossed with British numbers. He froze at the low rumble of a key turning the same metallic scrape as before, but closer now, the footsteps entered the DB5's room and stopped. Then a voice not the same as before, older, rougher, said, "You have no idea what you've walked into." The footsteps resumed, heading slowly toward the panel, the sound of each one marking off the seconds he had left to decide whether to hide in the darkness among stolen legends or step back through into the light and face whoever was coming for him.
The footsteps were closer, now steady and deliberate. Each one a slow toll. In the stillness he could feel the thrum of his own pulse in his ears and the weight of the scrap of paper hidden in his jacket. The air in the hidden room seemed to tighten, wrapping itself around him, as if the walls knew this was the end of the line.
He took one step back toward the narrow seam that led to the DB5, and in that moment his eyes caught on something high on the far wall, a narrow steel hatch with fresh scrape marks around the latch too high to be accidental. Someone had been here recently, and someone had tried to get in or out through it. The panel behind him shifted, the sound sharp as the bolts came free. Light knifed into the space from the main room, and the silhouette of the older man filled the gap. His voice was quieter now, but carried an unshakable certainty. "You've come too far for your own good."
The shadow stepped inside and the door eased shut again, sealing the two of them in the scent of dust and oil, settling heavy between words. The man's hand brushed across the DB5's roof, almost reverent, before he turned those sharp eyes on the intruder. There are cars that change hands. There are cars that change history, and then there are cars that can never be spoken of outside these walls. This one belongs to the last kind.
From somewhere beyond the false wall came a muffled mechanical roar, low and rising, as though some great engine had awakened. After years of sleep, the older man tilted his head, listening, and for the first time there was something in his eyes, not anger, not threat, but the smallest flicker of unease. He said quietly, "They're here early," and without another word, he moved to the DB5's driver door, sliding inside the engine, coughing once before settling into that deep, unmistakable purr. the sound that had once shaken cinema speakers around the world. The warehouse seemed to grow smaller around him as the car's headlights flared to life, dust swirling in their beams. The older man's voice rose above the growl, "Hold on to your story, if you must, but don't follow the rest of it." Then the DB5 rolled forward into the dark gap behind the false wall, swallowed by blackness and the echo of its exhaust, leaving him standing alone in a room that suddenly felt much too empty, with the knowledge that the mystery was still moving and he might never catch it again.